an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Wall of Storms, chapters 36, 37, and 38, Strangers, The Prince's Stand, and The Empress's Request. In these chapters, there are fucking dragons. That's all. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. All right, Kyle. I take issue with the fact that you are not here today in the chat. Of all days, where are you? Kyle, come answer for your crimes. This fucking book has dragons in it. Now listen, guys. It's not like a book with dragons in it is so unusual. It's not like a fantasy book with dragons in it should be that out of left field. But I was not led to believe in the previous book or the first whole half of the second book that dragons were a thing in this universe. And not only do dragons turn up here, but they are not even called dragons because nobody in the world that we have been occupying has ever seen them before, which just adds a whole other element to the whole thing. It's just so... This author, I feel like this is a real stroke of genius. I can't overstate how startling it is, because there is no hint anywhere on the cover art, in the like tales of old countries and whatnot. There is nothing at all in the lore of this book, either in world or out of it, that hinted at the fact that this was going to become a plot point. And I genuinely am in awe of the fact that he has written this much of this story and had dragons up his sleeve and just bided his time as well as he did without ever showing his hand at all. And then when he played the dragon card, it was such a complete shock that I was sitting there like, I'm certain I'm reading this wrong. There's no way. I mean, hats off. Hats off, sir. That is impressive AF. I don't even know what to say. This was masterfully done. This might be one of the biggest shocks in any book I've ever read. Like, it's just, it shifts everything over into a different, like, lens. But he has established this world so completely before doing it that it doesn't feel at all cheap, or it doesn't feel like a cliche. There's nothing about this that feels familiar even in any way. I can't tell you guys what it was like to read this for the first time. If you're somebody reading along and listening to this show, I just hope that you get what I'm talking about and that it had the same effect on you. That's all I can say, is that I just really hope for you it was as effective as it was for me. Because I don't think I have ever had that kind of total shift in the way I see things in a book. And it's not, plot-wise, honestly, it doesn't make much of a difference. Like, these guys could have attacked with anything and it still would have had the same effect. But because it's dragons, it just, this just really threw me for a loop. I'm 100% here for it. I am very impressed by it. I'm just all about it. I'm all about it. So let me back up a little here. Chapter 36, Strangers. Oh boy. Poor Zato. The thing is, when it comes to this sort of thing, Zato keeps talking about having empathy. And honestly, I admire the hell out of that, and I don't think that he's entirely wrong. I am all about empathy, as you guys know, and I feel that's like one of the things in shortest supply in the world, probably. But when he says empathy, it's immediately followed up with contempt. It's immediately followed up by this sort of paternalistic, we know best and have empathy because these ignorant fools don't really know what they're getting into. That's the vibe that is the through line for this whole chapter that leads him down this road. It's a simultaneous, I'm trying to see things from their perspective, but also wildly underestimating them and condescending to them in a way that is so insulting. If I only took a second to really think through, that's what I'm doing. And it's not like if he had thought it through, he would really have come out of this any other way. I don't think. I believe that even if somebody tried to tell him, you're being kind of insulting and belittling right now, even if he had listened to them, I don't know that he really would have changed like the fundamentals of how he decided to handle the situation. I suspect not. But it hurts a little bit to know that he was like so close to kind of getting exactly how he should handle things. He was very, very close, and he just doesn't quite make it the rest of the way to the conclusion that he should come to, which is caution. He doesn't quite get the way that this looks, and the contempt that he has extends to his advisors. That's the other problem, is that he is being instructed by somebody who knows better, really. And even if he doesn't believe the guy knows better, he should at least maybe take a second to hear the dude's point of view. But he is unwilling to. He just doesn't. He thinks he knows best. It's that simple. He thinks he knows best when it comes to his advisors, and he thinks he knows best when it comes to these people, these new people. And it's an arrogance that he really pays for. And unfortunately, he's not the only one that pays for it. Everybody does. That's the part that's the most upsetting, is if somebody suffers the consequences of bad judgment, that's one thing. But when the consequences fall on everyone, that just feels so wholly unfair, it kills me. So, okay. Guys, I'm telling you. The tent's squat cylinders about the height of a man, topped with flat conical tips, were made of hide. And he couldn't tell what kind of hide they were made from. Now, I should mention here that he is still operating under this assumption that these are immortals that are coming at them, basically from the laps of the gods, and finally showing themselves to man. And he starts to realize his mistake once he finally gets a look at these people. But it is not. It takes a minute for him to really accept that he isn't dealing with immortal beings. He wants so much for this to be a supernatural situation. And honestly, considering what dragons are, one could argue it still is, but not in the way he was hoping for or expecting. That's for damn sure. So there's the description of what these people look like. It says, they were generally light-skinned, though heavily tanned by the sun, and the colors of their hair and beards ranged from pure white to a light brown. Dressed in skins and hides, they held war clubs made of bone or driftwood, tipped with shells and stones. Some had their hair entirely shaven off, while others wore neat braids that hung down their backs. A few wore helmets made from the skulls of animals. He saw few signs of metal weapons or armor, and no silk or hemp cloth. Many of them looked emaciated and short in stature, and the hides on their bodies were ragged and torn, as though they had been on a long journey with no opportunity to replenish their supplies. So they sound vaguely Viking. I mean, they're light-skinned and their hair only goes down to light brown. That's as dark as apparently it gets. So they certainly sound like they're bordering on Caucasian here. I don't know, obviously if we're thinking Vikings, but they don't have any like metal, they would have to be like, much earlier than the Vikings that we picture. But I don't know a whole lot about the history of exploration and when exactly certain communities would have reached, this could be like basically people originating from out of Russia, coming down to areas of, oh my God, Asia. Fuck. I kept wanting to be like East. Fuck's sake. It could be that the author is sort of like drawing a historical parallel with that. But I have to be perfectly honest, being an ignorant American, I have not been educated in the history of Asia almost at all. I was talking with a friend of mine recently, and she was saying that she had no idea that like Japan occupied China for a time. And I mean, I knew that, but I just didn't, it does not surprise me that she didn't know that. And that's really recent. As far as further back, it makes sense to me that this would feel like completely a new story to those of us who have a very Western-centric education. And I would be fascinated to know more about this if it is based on anything, or if it's a complete invention. I have no idea which one. So Ruthie realizes that they're not immortals once he spots them. They present these people with food, a bolt of silk, and a scroll that Prince Timu wrote, "Within the four seas, all men are brothers." And they attack the food and are very excited about it. They take the silk, but the scroll, they look at it and then they just kind of drop it on the ground and don't really pay any attention to it, which kind of bothers Ruthie a little bit. So they wind up like inviting him in, and they want him to be disarmed. And his advisor is not excited about this. Jima is the name of the one. The captain of the guards, who was also responsible for bearing the standard of Dara. Not knowing their intentions, we should not enter their camp defenseless. This is the problem with spending your life fighting instead of studying the books of the sages. Where's your capacity for empathy? You have to try and think about this from their perspective. Look at how primitive their equipment and dwellings are. Not a single metal weapon to be seen anywhere. Look at how quickly they devoured the food we presented. Imagine yourself in a strange country far from home, hungry, terrified, surrounded by a powerful army with weapons and armor far more advanced than yours. If a group of them wished to enter your camp, wouldn't you also demand some gesture of good faith? I have been a soldier all my life, Master Ruthie. Trust me. Though we may have better weapons, I can tell you these people are not afraid of us. And that, I think, is the key here, is that Ruthie is basing all of his empathy on what he would feel if he were in the position these people are in, that these people are allegedly in, I should mention, because we know now, They're hiding a secret weapon that is powerful AF. So they are not in the position that he thinks. But let's say that they are here in a strange land with less advanced tools and weapons. Let's just say that's true. They are still not afraid, and he can't wrap his head around that. That's not the way he functions in the world, and he can't imagine that's the way they do either. And that's like one of the things about empathy that's so difficult, is that you want to see things from another person's perspective, but you are inherently limited because of your own perspective. So as much as you try and see from someone else's point of view, you cannot help but bring your own baggage to it. There is no way to rid yourself completely of that. So you can try and you can attempt to put yourself in the mindset, but unless you really are able to imagine a thought process that is totally different from yours, you're not necessarily going to get any farther in understanding where somebody is coming from on a certain point, you know? This is the kind of thing I talk about where people are like mystified by, for example, let's say politically, people who claim XYZ is important to them, but then when it comes down to putting their money where their mouth is and actually supporting XYZ in principle and in practice, there is a total disconnect that a lot of people are just like, I don't get it. You say this matters and you get a chance to behave as if it matters. And then you choose not to behave as if it matters. What the hell? And the thing that people don't get in that sense is that the people who say that this matters, they mean it does in a hypothetical way when dealing with perfectly innocent, well-behaved human beings. They do not mean that it matters in terms of dealing with actual humanity and flawed humans and a system that might be somewhat corrupted or imperfect. That is the difference. And people fail to take into account that part of the equation. And so that's what's going on here with Ruthie, is that he is out here thinking about, if I were turning up somewhere with less advanced weapons in a strange place with a bunch of people who I don't know who could do me harm, I would be terrified. And yeah, you would, because you don't take into account the entire system that they're working in, which is that they have been trained to fight, that they are aware of what you're saying is the other thing. He doesn't know that they even speak the language. And you don't know that they have fucking dragons. So, So all of the people in Dara are, ooh, you hear that, guys? Got some thunder. It's a nice backdrop for this. The people of Dara are watching, and they're seeing them walking inside and like sort of excited about this whole thing. They are thinking still that these are immortals as well. And it says, this is something that I'm not totally sure what it means. And I was thinking it over and I'm still not totally sure. I think the strangers just bowed. Maybe Master Ruthie really impressed them with his learning and they bowed again. But they were doing it after Master Ruthie and his men already went in. Why would they bow when he couldn't see them? So this guy is Dumo, who's like saying, this is where your lack of schooling holds you back. Bowing after someone has left is a sign of even greater respect. And they like make fun of him because they say, oh, is that from such and such? And it turns out like that such and such is something that they made up, and he tries to pretend that's really a thing. And they realize that they have caught him out on trying to behave as if he knows some shit that he doesn't know. But I think when he says they're bowing again, those people are not actually bowing. I think they're bending over and picking up all of the weapons, if I'm not mistaken. That might be it, or there might be something else to that. I'm not totally sure. So Ruthie goes inside and is a little bit startled at the fact that everybody is sitting in this really like casual way that's sort of disrespectful. One of the soldiers tries to like take issue with it, but Ruthie is like, dude, they just may have different customs here. Don't get mad at them for not, subscribing to the same ideas as us when they are not from around here. And to a point, I was kind of like, that makes sense. However, he isn't aware, again, that they know his language and they know perfectly well what they're doing. And I feel a little sorry for him, honestly, because he really is trying to get them give them the benefit of the doubt. He's doing what in some ways I probably would have done. Not entirely. I think he is being way too dismissive of his advisor, who is there for a reason. But I do get where he's coming from on a lot of this. So he says, I'm sure soon after we've established trust, they'll give our weapons back. And they sit down. Ruthie nodded and returned the same ridiculous grin. They began to pass around a large, crude ceramic bowl and took sips in turn. It seems the word that is used to describe what this is kefir. I think that this is meant to be kefir, which is a fermented, like a yogurt drink. And they have this conversation where this guy wants to know, hypothetically, how they would fight if they were to get into a battle. And he makes like this laughing sort of gesture as if to indicate that is the hypothetical, like just for shits and giggles. Let me know what this would be. So this guy explains. Listen, I said in a lot of ways he handled this in a similar way as I would have. I draw the line here. I would try and give them the benefit of the doubt. I would try and be cool about them maybe not knowing customs or what's considered respectful versus disrespectful. I would really do my best. But once you get to the point that people are asking you specifics about battle formations and defensive maneuvers, that is where you decide to shut the fuck up. Like, dude, come on. So, fucking Ruthie spills it all. All of it. I mean, hours go by. Zato Ruthie felt elated. He might once have met a humiliating defeat at the hands of Gin Mazzotti in the woods of Rima, but here today he had managed to intimidate and impress a barbarian king into willing submission to the Emperor of Dara just by drawing pictures in the sand. And I mean, guys, the only thing that I regret about the way this all ends is that, I mean, not the only thing, but in terms of Zato Ruthie specifically, I really want him to get to see and live with the results of his poor judgment. But instead, he gets killed right away and everybody else has to live with his consequences. And that's a damn shame. I really would have liked it better if he had to do it. You know, just come on. Seems only fair. So they finally, the dude who's in charge, and apparently the word Pekyu is a title like emperor, but he goes by Pekyu Tenryo. Pekyu Tenryo, I hope I'm getting that right. He looks up at Zato and says, "Thank you for your information." His accent was heavy, but the words were clearly understandable. All of the men behind Ruthie jump up because they realize, oh, fuck. While Ruthie is still standing there like, wait, what? And all of them are dead in an instant. And all of the townspeople who are looking out and wondering what the hell is going on, see people coming out of the tent and realize they're not bringing out our buddies that went in with them. What's going on? And this is when the battle begins, and the people of Dara are so certain that these interlopers with their crude weaponry are going to be no match, and they're downright eager to watch the slaughter of these people. And I think that's a really important point here, because it's very, very easy when so many people wind up being slaughtered and the villages wind up being burned by these dragons. It's really easy to be like, oh, that's not fair. You guys are so overpowered and you came in and took down these people. But like the people who are being killed were perfectly fine with watching a bunch of others get slaughtered as long as they weren't their own people. So it's not like these are such pure-hearted, innocent folk. You know? That's not to say it's exactly the same, because this is an invasion rather than a defense of a homeland. But nevertheless, they were pretty bloodthirsty and eager for some ugliness in a way that's really like, alarming is the word I'll use. So then we get to see the way that they defend themselves from the attacks from above, because they know that the airships are going to be dropping firebombs. And they have these weird hide shields that are made almost like, they look like tents almost, that they use to shield themselves from the exploding tar. And that tar is red fucking hot. Like, when it hits people on the legs, they fall to the ground screaming, and it really, like, it fucks your shit up. So this ain't nothing. But despite the fact that it is red hot and sears through flesh, it does not seem to be doing anything to these hide tents that they're using for defense. And everybody's like, what the fuck? And we wind up finding out later that this hide is definitely dragon hide, which is very fire resistant. So, I mean, that's a pretty big deal. Like, fire resistance, if you've got that, you're going to have an advantage that's like untold, you know? So these guys wind up like being able to really push further in than anybody expected. And then we have this beast show up. It took me a minute to really get what was happening. And even when I did, there was a moment where I still was like, they're not really dragons though, right? They're machines made to look like dragons. They're airships that look like animals. But no. Oh my God, guys. Excuse me. Oh, guys, I'm still recovering from the laryngitis. It's been acting up a little bit more today. Excuse me. Okay. The creatures were unlike anything Ra'olu had ever seen. An impossible amalgamation of features from different species. A barrel-shaped body about the size of 3 or 4 elephants. A serpent-like tail that trailed in the air. 2 clawed feet like those on falcons extended below the belly. A pair of great leathery wings that spanned 120 feet or more. And a long, slender neck topped with a deer-like antlered head. So, I don't know if this is supposed to be part of, like, something that Zomi saw when she was a kid, because I remember something with, like, an antlered head, a deer-like antlered head at the end of a long, slender neck, and I think that I didn't really get what was being said, and I think this was it, that it was like a dragon, but it was so subtly done and told from the perspective of somebody who is so not familiar with a fucking dragon that it completely like sidestepped my awareness, you know? With their massive wingspans and long necks, each appeared about 2/3 the length of an Imperial airship, though the torsos were much smaller. The beasts swooped, and with a speed that seemed unimaginable for their bulk, flew at the airships. So, they spend all this time as dragons, slashing and biting and tearing, and I'm thinking, alright, so they're dragons, but they like don't breathe fire, though. Wrong, they do. They were just waiting to get to that part. These fucking things lay waste to this entire town. Like, it's really fucking brutal. And Raolu winds up giving the signal to his men to charge because he knows that if he doesn't do it now, everybody's going to break and run. And he needs to buy some time to get away because he has to tell Timu what's going on here. Granted, later on, he winds up being kind of ashamed of himself for fleeing and leaving these men to themselves. But I kind of feel like this is one of the few times that I understand and don't think that it was purely selfish reasons. I'm sure he was happy to be able to save his own life. Don't get me wrong. But I'm not really like feeling that this was a guy who just wanted to save his own ass and is telling himself a story in order to justify it. I think that he was right in trying to prioritize Timu in this, you know, in this chain of information, because this is not something that you can like prepare for, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, you have to, there's no, oh, eventually he'll find out. You need to be able to go and tell him yourself that you witnessed this. Because who's going to believe it? You need to be somebody that's like high up on the totem pole to be able to get the king to listen to a story this insane. So the Prince's Stand, chapter 37, it takes place after this whole town has been taken down. There is an airship that is sent with as light a crew as possible to get the news as quickly as they can. Prince Timu refuses to board the ship because he's like, this message is going to the king and he could escape on it. But Timu says, first of all, no, I'm not abandoning everybody. And second of all, if I do that, everybody's going to feel that the emperor has also abandoned them. And that is going to be really bad for my dad, which I really admire. I think Timuk has come a long way in this section. And I am impressed with the fact that, like, you know, he is not as quick thinking in terms of politics and the implications of things. He doesn't necessarily understand other people's agendas all the time, but he has started to at least be as level-headed as he can and takes the advice of people who do know better. And the way he winds up handling this dude was, I don't know, I thought he was behaving really admirably. For an hour, Timu sobbed inconsolably for the death of Zato Ruthie, his teacher and the shaper of his mind. There would never be another scholar as gentle and forgiving in all of Dara. Then he wiped away his tears. He did not forget his duty. And that's important to me. It would be very easy for him to just kind of be like, oh my God, they killed my favorite person. They're attacking us with fucking dragons. I give up. But he does not do that. So they are realizing, because these guys have not shown up at their doorstep already, that probably the dragons are not infallible creatures that are like machines. They need time to rest. They need time to feed. They need time to gather their strength again in order to launch another attack. And that the attack that they just did was so intense and so incredibly full force, they probably are going to need a day at least. And Timu notes this as a weakness and thinks that's pretty significant. And I have to agree. I'm certain that they're mortal, the same as you and I. They cannot fly across all of Dara without pause, raining down fiery death upon everyone. So Prince Timu adds a postscript to the message and then lets it go without him. And then we have him meeting the leader of the barbarian horde. It's pretty good. Pekuchenril comes up and says, everybody is fleeing and begging for their lives and cowardly. I thought you guys valued honor. And I can't believe that you're coming out here whining to me for mercy. And Timu's like, dude, that's not what I'm doing. I am fine if you decide to kill me. He says, and Pekutenro is like, well, first of all, I can't really kill you because you aren't a fighter and there's not going to be any honor in that for me. Like, look at you. You have smooth skin. You're obviously like, that would be nothing. With a prince like you, your father's empire is but a child's play tent. Timu refused to take the bait. You have already killed thousands, but they were soldiers and it was their duty to die in defense of the people, a duty that I am bound by as well. To carry out that duty, I've given orders for the people of the city today, and indeed of the entire island of Dasu, to cease all resistance. There is no honor in fighting a hopeless war. Lives are more important. Tenryo now looked at Timu with something approaching respect. If you're not interested in saving yourself, then what are you doing blocking my way into the city? I come here to warn you that if you dare to harm the unarmed people of Dasu, then even as a ghost I will lead the people in a war against you until you are driven back into the sea. And it says, though Timu was but a young teenaged boy who appeared more comfortable with the writing brush than the sword, he made this speech with a steady voice and serene demeanor. Ra-Olu felt a thrilling joy as he watched Timu. And I really, really appreciated this, that like, he is really doing the best that he can. He's keeping his head. This guy's trying to bait him. He's not falling for it. And Tenryo says, first of all, I'm not afraid of ghosts. Second of all, I believe that obedience can only be enforced through terror and death. A scene of carnage will pacify an unruly population more than all the pretty speeches in the world. Timu stared at Tenryo, and for the first time the reality of what he was facing seemed to be sinking in. That is a philosophy of evil. Good and evil are mere labels we place on deeds that benefit or harm us, and I have wagered the lives of my thanes and warriors upon a mere hope for a refuge in the shoreless sea. And that's thanes, the use of that as well made me wonder if that was like, to them I owe every duty, but to you and yours, nothing. A better life for my people is the only good for which I strive. I intend to conquer all of Dara, and I'll not stop until all the men of these islands lay prostrate at my feet, living or dead, and the lamentation of their women have overwhelmed the tides. Timu's face twisted in a mixture of terror and defiance. Tenryo gazed down at him, and the Peku's voice was almost compassionate as he spoke again. Do not be afraid for your own life. You're more useful alive, but you will watch as we make an example of Day. It's perhaps the most valuable lesson of all. The slaughter of Day lasted 3 days. Fucking awful, man. Ugh. That's so awful. I feel so bad for Timu. He's trying so hard, man, He really is. And he'll probably learn a lot from this. But again, everybody else has to suffer the fucking consequences, So then we go to chapter 38, The Empress's Request. And we have Gin Mazzotti in her cell being visited by Gia. And Gia has brought this bottle of wine and 1 cup, to which Gin is just like, wow, really? 1 cup. So it's just poison for me. Good to know. And it turns out it's not, but it's completely understandable why Gin would feel this. So we get this pretty great conversation. I really, really enjoyed this. I was saying, I think like maybe last episode or the episode before, that it's such a shame that Gin and Gia aren't on the same side, because they are both very intelligent, tactical thinkers. And if they teamed up, they could be great together. And that sort of seems to be the way Gia feels as well. But yeah, so there's this moment where she Gin says, I suppose that Amu's noble acts of treason were more substantial than mine. Gia replies, you don't consider harboring the leaders of a rebellion under the banner of the hegemon treason? And Gin says, I consider it a duty to protect witnesses to a plot brewing at the side of the emperor as he lies asleep. And Gia stops dead and is like, ugh, fuck, all right, you got me. And Gin says that Nodami and Doru Solofi were fucking dodo birds. I didn't keep them alive because I was trying to foment rebellion. I kept them alive because they were evidence that they had been played and that there was something else happening. And Gia says, you know what? I fucking knew if anybody was going to figure out what was going on, it was going to be you. And here you are, just ruining my plans. I never thought you'd be so bold as to harbor those two. And Gin says, I thought the emperor would listen to me. I was trying to, she was trying to bide her time. And she was like, yeah, that's exactly your problem. You keep relying on his trust rather than doing what would be smart with removed from the emperor. And Gin picks up the cup and drinks it all, thinking that she's finally agreeing to her death, and sits there waiting for the poison to take effect, and then realizes all of a sudden that nothing is happening. And Gia has to be like, yeah, it's not poisoned. And Gin says, oh, so it was a test. Did I pass? And Gia says, you passed it long ago. You could have seized me the moment I came down here, defenseless save for a single guard. You could have demanded whatever you liked. An airship to take you away, trusted units to escort you back to Nokita, an audience with Kuni. But you didn't. It would have been pointless, said Gin. That you came down to me like this means that you were prepared for such contingencies. If I did seize you as a hostage, it would only be confirming my charges as a traitor. To which Gia is like, I mean, yeah, but still, you had to think things through enough to know that that was the way to go. And that's what I'm talking about here, is that you are just really, really good at this. I doubt I would ever be your match if you weren't so proud. Which, yeah, that's exactly her problem, man. I wish she would just fucking get over it, but no. Gia says, I thought Dara no longer needed warriors. Kuni's power may have come from swords, but to rule, he must rely on writing brushes. When a sharp sword is lying around the house with young children around, someone is bound to be hurt. And Gin thinks that she's talking about specifically Timu and wanting Timu to be the one to take over here. And this is really the mistake, I think, that Gin makes in terms of her dealing with Gia, because she is underestimating what Gia's concern is here. She thinks that it's only about the line of succession, that also Gia is concerned with pride, really. And that's not it at all. Gia wants this whole nation and its governance to be able to withstand changes in leadership and generational movement. And she does not feel that's possible with the way things are so based on personal relationships and personal trust. She's essentially like, that's all well and good to be able to form those kinds of relationships. But if everything is dependent on them and something falls out, then you're left with what? And my children aren't necessarily going to be able to trust their people the way that Kuni is able to trust his friends. And I had to be able to prove that friendship isn't enough for a fucking system of government. We need to have fucking checks and balances in place. We need to have basically a independent body keeping an eye on everything and making sure that things are run appropriately. So Gin starts talking about Timu. I would have acquiesced no matter what the emperor's decision was. And Gia says, it's precisely because you speak of acquiesce that I had to do what I did. In a time of peace, it should never be the place of those who lead armies to say who should or shouldn't ascend to the throne. Which is a really good point, honestly. The way that she says that is just basically like, yeah, you say, oh, I would have allowed him to do this. It shouldn't be up to you. Allowing the king to choose who his successor is not the way this should be talked about. And don't you understand how like incredibly dangerous that is? That is really a problem. So, and then she says, I would fight for Timu. My ambition is to serve the house of Dandelion. And Gia says, you might, but would Firo? Would Thekakimo? Or Pumayemu? If Firo raised the banner of rebellion, how many nobles and generals would side with him? And should that day come to pass, would you not rationalize to yourself that you were being loyal to Kuni by taking up the cause of the child who most resembled him in spirit? It isn't for Timu that I do this, though I know you and others will think so. I would have held to the same course even if Firo were the heir, especially so then. Violence has a cost, and that debt must be repaid. I wanted to ensure that the cost isn't so high as to cause the crewmen to fall back into the sea, for the storm to catch up to the ship, for the ghost and vengeful souls to topple the house of Dandelion. And then she talks about Kuni has kept all the nobles and generals in check because of personal loyalty, yada, yada, yada. She says the thing that I kind of went over. And Gin says, well, you're kind of thinking like Mapidere. And he wanted to take weapons away from common people, and that didn't work out. And Gia says, no, it didn't. Because he didn't have any way to replace what he was doing. He didn't put a system there. He just took warfare out of the equation and then tried to act like everybody was going to be able to get along without there being something else just as firm in its place. It doesn't have to be as violent, but it does have to be governing in some way. And he did not do that. And then says, it would not matter then that an heir is weak or strong. The people of Dara need a system that will serve them no matter who is emperor. And Gin says, you think if you eliminate all independent military commands and put scholars in charge, that they'll just take so fucking long to decide on anything that you won't wind up like having to deal with a rebellion because they would never agree to things? And Gin's like, you did see that there was like a rebellion just now though, right? Like, or no, that's not Gin. I was like reading that. I'm like, that's no. Gia says, see, they just rebelled. And Gin's like, you gave them all of the tools to force them into rebellion. And Gia's like, no. See, the thing is, I put them in a position to more easily do what they would have done anyway. I sped it up. I didn't force them. I didn't do anything to take away their free will or, manipulate them into a thing. I just gave them the tools to see that this was a potential possibility and let them walk into it if they wanted to. And they did want to. It would have happened eventually much more slowly anyway. But I just allowed it to basically get brought to the surface much more quickly and much sooner because I wanted to prove a point. You think I poisoned the ground. I think I merely drew poison out of it. You think I tipped a bucket. I think I merely made it fill faster. I expect we'll never agree, as we each only see what we expect to see. And at this point, Gin says, you make me regret not listening to a beggar in a white cape a long time ago who advised me to aid neither the emperor nor the hegemon when I still had the chance to carve out my own fate, Gin said. Gia looked up sharply at this. Gin sighed and looked away. And I'm angry at myself now for remembering that day with regret, which seems to only confirm your way of looking at the world, an ugly, brutal world that I do not want to live in. To which Gia's just like, yeah, sucks, don't it? But this is it. This is the world we got. I don't know what to tell you. So Jin says, you win. I don't really have the heart to deal with this anymore. And Gia's like, but do I really? Did I win? If my husband were to go to war personally, how many men do you think he could command effectively? And Gin says he would be a good 100 chief, which is not really too impressive. And Gia asks, and what about you? How many men can you lead? And Gin is like, come on. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, you name it. I could do it. It's really not a problem. And she says, so then why do you serve him? And Gin says that basically, maybe I can overturn him, but I can't rule. I couldn't make Dara a better place. I believe that he can, and I've never wavered from that. And Gia says that she wishes they could have been friends, which really was touching, you know? Like, I don't know if you guys have had that happen where you like, I don't even want to say get off on the wrong foot because it makes it sound like it's just an immediate thing that can be changed. But you are at loggerheads with somebody. And even though you are, there's a part of you that kind of respects them. And you can't help but like defend them sometimes when other people come at them too hard, even though you know that you shouldn't. There's a real feeling here of just these two women who like, they could have come so close to like making this work out. So Gin says, essentially, that if they're going to execute her, to please at least not harm her daughter. And Gia's like, okay, look, first of all, we would never harm her. But second of all, I don't want you to fade away. If Dara were at peace, which is what I thought, that would be fine. But evidently, that is not what's actually happening here. And she pulls out the letter from Timu and hands it to Gin. And Gin reads it and looks up and is like, what? Seriously? And Gia says, I'm asking you to save Dara again. And Gin's like, you have to say that I'm innocent and confess your plot to everybody. I'm not fighting jack shit for you unless you clear my name. You have everybody out here thinking I'm a fucking traitor. And now you want me to save your ass? Go fuck yourself. And Gia's like, I can't tell everybody. If I do that, everything that I've been laying in place is going to just go up in smoke. And nobody will dare to go up against the nobles and stuff again. Because they'll think that it's like, you know, all a trap and whatnot. And Gin says, listen, I said what I fucking said. So you can figure out what you want to do. But I have nothing to lose but my life, which I was about to lose anyway and had kind of come to terms with. So you trying to be like, do this or die doesn't really hold any weight anymore because I thought I was about to die anyway. Figure it out. Not my problem. And I was kind of like, you know what? Good for you. I really was. So then we see all of the rumors flying around, all of the people who are fleeing as refugees from the cities that are being attacked and the things that people are saying to one another. The stories they're telling, like they're horrifying. And some of the stories might even be true. You know, I really don't, there's some of them that are so awful that I'm like, I bet they are true. And then they talk about Marshal Mazzotti. They say the Empress has asked her to return to her old position, but what can the Marshal do? She's just the mortal, the same as the rest of us. May the gods save us. I wonder where they've been. And that's the end of the chapter. So I don't know what the gods think of this. If they know what these things like, they've got to know. But I'm just real curious about the gods' perspective on this whole deal. And, you know, people are also concerned, like, about the airships, which had been their primary form of weaponry. Now they're up against fucking dragons that can just burn them in an instant. It says that they lost the airbase at Mount Kiji, which means that they can't replenish the gas in them in any case now. So they're kind of out of the picture. I'm just really, really curious how this is going to go down. And I want Gin Mazzotti to, I don't want her to die. I want her to figure out some ingenious way of fighting back against these guys. But I also don't want Gia to entirely get away with what she's doing. I understand where Gia is coming from here. And I really, in some ways, believe that she is right in her assessment of what makes a good government and a lasting peace. But the ruthlessness with which she was able to send people to their deaths and allow innocents to be slaughtered to cover up her secrets, it just leaves such a bad taste in my mouth that I find it really hard to forgive the methods that she used to get this all to happen. I'm just not sure that I can get past that. So I don't want Gia to confess everything and be totally exposed. But I don't want her also to entirely get away with it. Maybe if she confessed her sins to Kuni, at least, that might be enough. And not all of the people. But I don't know what Kuni's reaction would be. I honestly don't, because part of me is like, I feel like his instinct after losing several friends, especially the absolute tragedy of his friend who was beheaded in like right near him recently. I don't think that he's forgiving Gia for that. So I don't know what kind of middle ground they could come to here that would satisfy Gin's need to have her honor restored and would make Gia feel as if she was still free to act the way that she feels that she needs to in order to succeed. I just can't think of a good compromise here. And I don't know. You know, there's nothing unifies so much as a common enemy. So maybe if Gin finds out that her daughter is in danger, that might be enough. But I don't know. Even that, it sounded like she knew that her daughter could be in danger from that letter. And that didn't seem to be enough for her. So I don't know. I guess we'll see. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to wrap up this episode. I want to thank Kyle very much for commissioning this. This was so much fun. God, these chapters. I'm trying to see how much more there is left of this book. This is a long book. Shit, there is so much to go. All right, cool. Well, there's a lot left, so I guess we'll see. And I'm really excited about it. I just don't know what's happening with these fucking dragon invaders. Jesus Christ. No idea. And now the third book is looking real different in my mind, you know? Who knows? All right, guys. Well, thank you all so much for listening. I hope you're enjoying it. And I will be seeing you soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.